If there's one thing I have learned along my journey toward motherhood, it is surrender. Circumstances and events don't always go as planned. The fact that I, a naturopathic doctor who aims to do as little intervention as possible, ended up needing medical assistance to not only conceive but also birth my baby is beyond ironic. Dr. Morgan and I relive the crazy story of my daughter's birth, and I share not only the journey, but also the insights that brought me peace through a process that ended up drastically different than I imagined. This is definitely a special convo, so let's get started. Welcome to Healthy as a Mother, the podcast for becoming and being a mother, with your co-hosts, Dr. Leah Gordon and Dr. Morgan McDermott, two naturopathic doctors who get it.
Each week, we teach you how to be the healthiest mother you can be, from fertility and preconception to pregnancy and birth prep, through postpartum and throughout motherhood, empowering you with the natural health guidance and education you're not getting elsewhere so you can confidently navigate the broken system at large.
The real, the raw, the untalked about. And remember, this information is not intended to diagnose, treat, or manage any disease. Always consult with your doctor before making any changes.
Let's hear about your birth story, Dr. Leah, for your sweet baby girl, Avia.
Yes.
And how it sort of started in one place, ended in another with a lot of different ups and downs. And, even just the process of going to 42 weeks and the law in California and the kind of natural induction methods that we tried. I was there as your doula, and it was really like such a blessing. It's going to be one of the highlights of my life always to think about being there for you. And I'm not going to cry.
Oh my God, that makes me
so sweet.
So happy. It was the highlight of my life. And honestly, I'll get into the story, but you not being able to be there for the actual birth was like one of the saddest parts of the whole thing.
It's okay.
I know, but it was just like all of your support that you showed me. It was, I think very few people actually get to feel the love that I felt from you during that time. And I feel really blessed and grateful for that.
I love you. You're my best friends.
I love you too. Love notes. Anyways, so my birth story, for any of you guys who are listening who don't know about my husband and I's infertility story, that's a whole other topic for another day. But long story short, we had to do IVF to have a baby. And it was already really challenging. Obviously our infertility journey was very long. My pregnancy was quite challenging, which I can kind of highlight a little bit. And I really thought the birth was going to be like the easy part of my motherhood journey. And I manifested and worked on affirmations around that. But, one thing I have learned and that I've gotten really good at is the practice of surrendering. And my birth was another practice in that, something that started along my fertility journey, and it just continued that practice. They're like, did you really learn your lesson? And I really did feel like I did, actually. If I was like being tested, I remember a specific moment, which I'll get to, that I had the thought, I did it. Like, I really feel like I have grown, like my soul has grown, and I'll highlight that. So how it starts, my pregnancy, like I mentioned, was sort of rough. I was really sick the beginning of my pregnancy, and obviously grateful to be pregnant after so long, but felt really pretty crappy and pretty nauseous, lots of reflux, couldn't eat anything, seemed to react to everything, just lots of issues, fatigue, all of that. It did start to get better around the second half of my pregnancy. And unlike a lot of women, by the time I got into my third trimester, I actually felt really good. And I was not ever at that place where I was like, oh, I'm so pregnant, I just want this baby out, I actually felt so good compared to the first trimester all the way up until my birth. I could walk, I could eat without vomiting. It was lovely. It was just like, what a joy. And we didn't know, obviously, when she was going to come. So you flew in from Idaho around my due date, and my mom as well came. And I was working with a midwife and planned a home birth. So the whole plan was to have a home birth in this beautiful new home that we had moved in the middle of my pregnancy. And I had a beautiful bedroom. I was so excited. I imagined giving birth there. It was going to be wonderful. So you came in and my mom came in, and, just things weren't happening. I went to my midwife.
It was so much fun. We had
so much fun.
Every day.
It was probably the best 2 weeks of my life. And my mom too, she was actually really depressed to go back home to Colorado because she just got to hang out. It was just like living with amazing women, kind of the experience we had in college, just different because I was pregnant and my mom was there. And so it's very different.
But your mom is awesome. And it was so much fun. It was like we were just the three best friends that anyone could ever have, like going on walks and going to the beach and eating great food.
And it was amazing. So we were just hanging out, kind of waiting for things to happen, you know, and I would have symptoms here and there. And it's so hard being a first-time mom because you just don't know. It's like, oh, is that like weird little thing? Is like labor starting? And, you know, it's not ever usually a thing, but sometimes it is. So I had a lot of those. I don't know if this is something. And you were always trying to coach me through what it is that I would actually be feeling and, you know, all of that stuff. So the 2 weeks my due date came and passed. I went to my midwife, and around this time, she did do a sweep of my membranes, which, you know, you and I have talked, and looking back, don't know if that was a good thing or not, whether that caused issues or not, which we can get into talking about. But, you know, we were just kind of hoping that things were going to be good. Now, this was at the time in the height of kind of COVID vaccine world. So this was September of 2021. And I was hearing a lot of horror stories of women having to give birth in the hospitals, masked, alone, feeling judged for maybe not getting vaccinated, all of these different things that were happening around that time. And so my biggest fear was going to the hospital and having an issue with COVID and them not allowing my husband to come and them not allowing my doula to be there. And that was kind of my biggest fear of just around COVID. So a lot of people say, you know, you shouldn't have fear of things because that's often what you attract into your space. And I've asked myself a few times, like, did I have so much fear that I just kind of pulled that into my space? But I really was still optimal about it and not thinking that would happen. So it's hard to say one way or another. But regardless, around a week after my due date, we started to get a little anxious, a little nervous. I kind of felt guilty, which some people maybe have experienced this, especially with people in town like you and my mom, where I'm like, why isn't she here yet? I'm so sorry that you've left your family and, you know, everyone's taking care of you.
We talked about this at length, but it was like, this is the time for you. But it is, I get it. It's tricky. Even when like, you know, you're in the throes of labor, sometimes like you can look around and see all these people that been there for hours and it just feels like, but we really do need to like just lean into that. Like it was my choice to be there.
I know. And you kept saying that. But I did feel that in a way. You know, my dad was left at home taking care of the farm and feeding the horses and doing all the things. But, you know, my mom was having the time of her life. So it was great. And, you know, we just every day we'd go on walks. We would walk the steps. You would have me do all the things. I was eating dates. And, you know, toward that second week when we were doing, I don't even know what they're called. What are the things you had me laying on my side doing?
Like the mile circuit and the guideline release. And yes.
Yeah. We were just trying lots of spinning baby stuff, everything to try to make sure she was optimal. And then after that second week, you know, we started doing some more natural kind of induction-y things with homeopathy and, you know, all of these different movements and practices.
Acupuncture.
Acupuncture to just try to get things going.
Because you would have cramps. They just weren't contraction-like, but you'd be like, every time we walked, I remember you'd be like, I'm like feeling low period cramp kind of things, you know? And at some point when you're 41, almost 42 weeks, that sensation will take off and become full labor. And so it was sort of tricky. Like we kept getting psyched out. We kept thinking and then you lost your mucus plug too.
Yes. Yeah. I lost my mucus plug and that was a few days. Was it a few days?
I think it was like 4 days before you actually started contractions really.
Yeah. So there was like a lot of just false flags and we had a great time though. I mean, gosh, we had some epic dance parties, eating avocado pudding from the Trilogy Sanctuary's avocado pudding, their decadence. Oh my gosh, we made it all day. It was so rich and that's probably why my baby was 8 pounds.
Almost 9 pounds.
Yeah. But we just had so much fun. So I would never trade it for the world. And, you know, we just had a great time and I have a lot of amazing memories from that time. And she just kept not coming. But, you know, she was happy and chilling. And eventually I started to get a little nervous because, you know, I have a lot of faith in the body and the faith in that the babies choose when they want to come. I do believe that a lot of babies, especially first time babies, come later than their due date, and that's intentional and okay. And like, we shouldn't rush it. So I had all of these thoughts in my mind. And at the same time, I was coming down to the wire with COVID because in California, you cannot legally have a home birth past 42 weeks. And we asked our midwife, I was like, okay, if I'm at 41 and 6, like that night, and I go into labor, but the baby hasn't come, I mean, are you going to transfer me to the hospital? I mean, in kind of a roundabout way, she said sort of, yeah, which.
Yeah, she was basically like, if you're pushing, no, but if you're not, it was a little difficult to tell what she was really meaning, but it felt kind of scary.
Yeah, it did. It felt very imminent of like, okay, now I feel like I'm on a pressure time frame. Yep. And that's not an energy you want to be in these situations that you can't control. Right. Mm-hmm. So, you know, it's just like infertility where you want it, you need it. It needs to happen right now, like so badly. And you can't do anything to make it go faster, control it. And you just have to live in that uncomfortable place. So at this point, you know, we were doing all the things every day, and every day that passed, I was getting a little bit more desperate again with the fear of, yes, I knew that hospitals often caused a series of interventions, although I knew it was possible to have a vaginal birth in the hospital. I taught about this, right? I mean, I knew it so well about the series of interventions that can happen in the hospital, but more than anything, my fear was not having my husband with me and then masking us and just having like a really weird COVID experience more than anything in the hospital, because it was just weird at that time.
It was really weird and really,
you know, like, are they going to take my baby? Are they going to, you know, it was just, that was what I was more afraid of. So anyways, I was, I think 41 and 5, I believe.
Is when it started. Yeah.
Yeah. So that day someone's like, you just have to go walk, you know? And I was like, okay, I've been walking, but we walked Torrey Pines in California, which was a really big, very big hike, big hill, big hike. And I remember I had my birth playlist because they were all planned out. And I have this goddess birth playlist, and I put my headphones in and I remember going there walking with Mike and my mom. And there's this really steep hill at the beginning of Torrey Pines. And I remember connecting with my baby and going into this deep meditation. And I was in like this crazy zone where I was so into the music. I was so in this goddess power place. And I basically had a conversation with her in my head throughout that whole walk of, you know, I trust you. I really believe that you're going to come in whatever way you need to, but you need to decide what that's going to be. Like, give me a sign, a message, you know, is this going to happen? Are we going to have a home birth? Are we not? Because we are coming down to the wire. Like, if you want to have a home birth, little baby, you have to go into labor today, or like this isn't going to happen, you know, because first time births aren't usually quick. Right. So I had this whole conversation. I felt really empowered. And I did come at the end of it to the acceptance that, like, you know, I cried, like walking up that hill, I was crying, you know, processing the loss that like I might not actually have the birth that I imagined, just like I didn't get pregnant how I imagined. And it took me a lot longer to accept IVF actually than it did to accept my birth situation. But I cried, I got it all out. I got to the place of acceptance where I'm like, you know what, whatever you decide, I trust you. At the end of the day, I just want you in my arms. And so I had really come to that place of acceptance that whatever happens is fine. And we got home and ate dinner that night. And right after dinner, my labor started.
First, though, you got home from that walk and you were like in a different – because I didn't go on the walk with you. I stayed back with Sloan. Because remember, Sloan was like with us the whole time. She was about to turn 1. Mm-hmm. And I stayed back with her and you came in and I remember you feeling like in this very kind of different energy. And then you went outside and the wind was blowing all sorts of crazy. And you had your headphones in. And remember, you were doing those like big figure 8 circles. You were leaning kind of like forward on this chair. Yeah. And
that.
I think
oh, maybe I do remember that.
Maybe it was the midwife or maybe it was your acupuncture. Somebody told you like, go do big hip circles with your hips, like big figure 8 hip circles. So you did for probably like 20 minutes or something like that. And you were so into it. And like your hair was blowing in the wind. And you were just like really rocking it. And Mike and I were standing in the kitchen like, whoa, like she's like something's going on over there, you know?
Oh my God. I love hearing your experience of my birth because I don't think we've ever really fully talked in length about what your experience of it was, because I got in these crazy zones. And when I put in my music, I do this with like sex too. I just like, I'm in like the zone. It's so good. Music is just the best for me, but I don't know what anyone else experienced around my birth.
Well, you're going to hear it.
Cool.
Yeah. So anyway, we were just sort of like trying to leave you be and leave you alone and finishing up making dinner. So then you came in and we started eating, and then, keep going from where you were. I just wanted to mention that because you were in such this like, this mindset that was really just different. You hadn't been in it before. Like,
weird.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, so we had a good meal, which was great because I knew, I'd been prepping, it's like a marathon. You've got to go to sleep. As soon as labor happens, go to sleep, eat some food. I was like, I've got you. Like, I'm going to get this good meal in. It was awesome. I was like, I'm going to be so prepped. I'm going to be the most fueled person ever that goes into birth because I love food and food's so important to me. And so we had this great dinner. And then all of a sudden,
that's actually really important because another big fear you had the whole time was that you were going to get low blood sugar in birth and not be able to have the strength to do it. And
that was another reason why I was afraid to go to the hospital was because they weren't going to let me eat. Yes. Because I can't even go 4 hours without eating before I'm freaking out, And I was like, there's no way. Like I imagine the days that I go to the gym when I haven't had the most amazing meal ever and how hard it is for me and how shaky and irritable and crazy. And I'm like, there is no way I could go into birth, this crazy marathon that people talk about.
And the whole time you would talk about that during your pregnancy. And in my mind, it's just funny because what ended up happening, but in my mind, I was like, Leah, don't worry about it. Like, I am going to be thinking about it. I will be feeding you. I will be force feeding you. I'll be making all kinds of different little foods in whatever smoothies if you need to, if you can sip it. Like, I got you. Like, I'm going to keep your blood sugar on the top of my mind. But then,
then I ate my food. It was great. And then labor started, or what we thought was labor, because I started to get contractions. They obviously felt so different than anything else before. And I'm have a history of painful periods. So I'm not a stranger to having pain down there, but it just felt different and really intense, really fast. And, you told me to start timing them. And those initial ones were really quick, like
they were
close
every
together.
Like 4 to 7 minutes. And you had to like stand up from the table and kind of move around, and your face was sort of like, wait, what is this? And it was that pattern that we had been talking about for the whole 2 weeks that you hadn't quite felt yet, which was like it starts and then it gets stronger and stronger and stronger. And it has a peak and then it kind of wanes off because a period cramp just kind of like comes and it kind of goes, but it doesn't have this like wave quality to it. And these did. And we were like, oh, yes, like it's happening.
Yes. And it felt very, very intense, really fast. And so I actually got in the bathtub with Mike, and I was so excited. I knew I was going to try to go to sleep, but I wanted to kind of just like get in the bath and calm down. And we were like in there together. He got in there with me in my teeny tiny bathtub. And I just remember him holding me, and I was like excited and nervous. But I was well fed. So I was like, this is fine. I'm going to go to sleep, and then I'm just going to have my baby, and it's going to be beautiful. And so, we got ready for bed. Everyone was like, okay, let's go to bed. And
you
then
were very shaky. That was one other thing. You were like the adrenaline, which is another common thing that can happen at some point in birth. But usually when I've seen it and when I've experienced it myself is like, we're really chugging along, like it's getting close to transitioning into a true active labor pattern. And, also just to say, sometimes first births are really quick, and you'd had a couple of membrane strips. You're almost 42 weeks. We've been walking every day. You'd gotten
I'd lost my mucus plug.
Yeah. You'd lost your mucus plug. There was so many things that you'd been doing some like nipple stimulation protocols. So we were really like, in my mind, I was kind of like, wait a minute. This might be a really fast birth. We need to sort of be on top of this. Remember? So I let the midwife know, and I let the photographer know, and I looked at Mike, and I was kind of like, we might have a baby tonight. And he was like, tonight? I mean, maybe that's just naive of me to think that. I don't know. But the way that it was going, it was so intense, and your body's reaction, and they were like strong and hard, and they were quick. And it was like, okay, like, what do we need to do? So you were kind of, getting ready. And then it was sort of late anyway. So you're starting to get ready for bed.
Yeah. So we got ready for bed. And then I discovered when I laid down, I vomited. So just really like throws a wrench in my whole keep my blood sugar balanced and keep myself well fed. because if I stood up, I didn't vomit as much. But as soon as I laid down to rest, I would just vomit.
And it wasn't just like a little bit of vomit. It was like
Like,
all of your stomach.
which I'm not even a vomiter, or at least maybe I am, but I do everything in my power to not vomit. Like I don't over drink. I hated throwing up ever. I just try to do all the things to not, but this was obviously involuntary, something I couldn't control at all. And that is so depleting. I mean, if anyone's ever thrown up, one throw up, you're like, oh my God, I'm like, exhausted. That was crazy. And it just kept happening over and over again. And it was so sad because I was really tired at that point. I had walked Torrey Pines that day, which to any person was exhausting and would have required intense rest, let alone a 41 and 6 or 41 and 5 pregnant woman. And, I had thrown up. So I was like already in that weird place. And I tried to sleep that night and I couldn't. And so my, contractions were coming. They were coming quickly. My midwife actually thought it would be a quick labor. That's what she said initially. And so in the middle of the night, I was so exhausted and so frustrated that I built myself a pillow cocoon so I could try to sleep sitting up, because if I didn't lay down, I didn't vomit, which at the time I'm like, I wonder if there's a homeopathic for that, which we didn't even.
We tried to give you,
I tried all the homeopathy, but
Nux
not vomiting.
Phosphorus. Well, we tried to do Nux and phosphorus and some other things, but we should have tried Ipecac and tobacco. We should have tried to just kept trying everything, but you're so sensitive to homeopathy too. So it was sort of like, it was a little tricky because we didn't want you to like be proving it or reacting.
I know, which is possible, that some of the homeopathics that I took maybe induced me too soon, but it's whatever. It is what it is. So I built this fort and I remember falling asleep and dozing off and being like, oh my God, thank God, because again, as a first time mom, I didn't know. I just thought labor was really intense and then it kind of went away. And then it, I didn't know. So it gave me a break. I'm in the middle of the night. My contractions kind of slowed down and I was able to sleep, which I felt so grateful for. And when I woke up and told my midwife what my night was like, she seemed kind of concerned that my contractions were how they were initially. And then they kind of petered out and died down. And I didn't think much of it. And the midwife and my mom, no one really told me that was concerning at the time.
Which I just have to say, I still don't understand personally.
Yeah.
There's something about that. Maybe it's just my lack of knowledge. I'm totally willing to admit that it's something maybe it's just I haven't learned yet, but I have also seen it happen where people can have waxing and waning contractions can stop and, not stop, but, and then they never stopped. They just slowed down. They got to every 15 or maybe 25 minutes and they were lighter in intensity. Like you would still, cause I was like asleep curled up like a dog on the foot of your bed for, but I was comfy. I was super comfy. And you would still like get up and moan. And I would kind of like look at my phone, look at the time and you'd kind of be moaning, but you were sitting like a queen with like your feet together, butterfly, open legs, and sleeping with your mask on and your earbuds in and things. But it was like the confidence that she had when she came and she checked you, I think you were 3 centimeters, that something wasn't right was so like surprising to everybody else. I felt like, I don't know.
And I wasn't even 3 centimeters. I was like 1. Because I remember when she checked me, or maybe it was the first night she came, because I remember thinking I'm only 1 or 2 centimeters. It was so disheartening to me because I had already been through so much. And because I remember by the time I got we'll get there. So basically I'm laboring. We wake up in the morning. She comes. She's like, well, keep laboring. So this is me at 41 and 6.
Yeah.
No, that must have been 41 and 5 because I labored that whole day. So I labored that whole day at home. And it was at the end of that day that we decided it was time to go to the hospital. And I labored all night in the hospital and all the next day at the hospital.
Right. Okay.
So that would have been 40. Yeah.
When was she born? 42 even?
An hour and a half before 42 even, I believe.
So yeah, maybe it was 41 and 5.
Yeah. So anyways, so I was like, okay, so she said, my midwife said, I have one more day to or to take to the day to labor. And so we did a bunch of stuff that day. You guys were so sweet. And I kind of blacked out. And we were talking about this before, that you really go into this weird zone when you're in labor, or I did, with my music in. And I was just you kind of feel high a little bit and just
Your brain is
you're
drugging you full
yeah, you're in
on.
a
It is
completely
endorphins.
space.
Yes.
I don't remember. I see pictures and videos that you had of me and I don't remember that. Or if I do, it's like it's the only thing I can equate it to is being really drunk and like kind of like feeling fuzzy memories from something when you're like, was I there? I can't remember.
Yeah.
But I do remember distinctly one time when we were in the living room and the pain was so much like I wanted you guys to shake me or do
Oh,
something when
yeah.
I
We had
was
a rebozo. We were shaking your butt
yes.
and your hips.
And I remember I was on my hands and knees because my midwife just kept saying, you have to do the most painful things, anything that's the most intense, the most painful, which is like so cruel. It's like, oh. So I would get into the worst positions that made me so intense, but those were also the positions that made me vomit. So I remember getting on my hands and knees and Mike was under me. I think he was like holding me or shaking me or you were behind me. I don't know what happened, but I got into a really intense position and I remember being like, oh my god, I'm gonna vomit. And if I like turned to the side and you guys had the bowl for me, but if I hadn't turned I would have vomited all over Mike's face. And I had a really intense episode with the enema in the bathroom and there was just things coming out of me. I mean, and that probably also depleted me even more. So I had like crazy diarrhea, I was vomiting all over. So after that whole night of laboring, that whole day of laboring, I
And we
think they
did
checked.
like, just so people are like, well, what did you do that whole day? Well, we did a gajillion things. We like went on a little curb walk. So you kind of keep your hips up. We did all these like Captain Morgan poses. So you'd put your foot up on a chair and we take 3 contractions left leg, 3 contractions right leg. We did Miles Circuit a couple more times. You had an acupuncturist come over to the house
Yeah.
that day and do
Mm-hmm.
some acupuncture. We did side lying release on the table. We were doing the shaking the apples. We tried to get you to nap. You took a shower. You did a
I
bunch
don't
of
remember
different.
any of this. So I'm glad you remember.
Yeah, we were really, and then we would like just left you alone for a little while. And I mean, the contractions never stopped. You had contractions all day long.
Mm-hmm.
They just never got into a close pattern. They were like maybe 7 minutes was the closest I feel like that they ever got, but they were
Mm-hmm.
intense when they were happening. Like that video I just showed you before we started recording, you can hear it in your voice. You're like, oh, that kind of shaky
Mm-hmm.
tone that's like, it's so intense, like that pain. They were big contractions. They weren't just light little talking through them. No, you were eyes rolled in the back of your head, like in the zone doing it,
Gosh,
and
that's so wild. Yeah,
and
I
she came
don't
over at
even
some other
remember.
point to check you, and I think you were 4 centimeters, 3 or 4 centimeters. So you had gotten more, but she still had this air about it that was like, I don't think this is happening. And I think she even maybe pulled me aside and told me that. She was like, I just don't think this is going to happen here. And I was like, what? Why? I still, nothing, no like hard feelings necessarily on her. It just, there was maybe something that wasn't communicated, but it felt like confusing because
Mm-hmm.
everything, you were getting very exhausted. That was totally valid and true. And
Yeah.
it was like, but stuff is progressing. But
Yeah,
anyway,
yeah, yeah. And
very
again,
slowly.
being a first-time mom, it's like you just don't know what's supposed to happen. And I know it's different for every person. So by the end of that day, I remember kind of coming out around dinner time or late in the day, kind of coming out of my fog and almost getting more clear. Again, sort of like my stuff was slowing down again,
Mhm.
which is just not good or normal. I don't know. And this is kind of the time when my midwife and my mom and everybody kind of shared their concerns with me. I know my mom shared that in nature, my family raises animals and stuff, that if an animal goes into labor intensely and then it stops like that, it's typically not a good sign. And a lot of times they don't make it. The mom and the baby don't make it, obviously because we don't have a lot of intervention in the animal world. I mean, sometimes you do, but I didn't know that there was any concern. I didn't know what was going on, what was happening. I just thought it was like normal. So I was just doing my thing, doing whatever you guys told me to do. And so at that point, I honestly, the idea of being able to sleep, because I hadn't slept really much that whole night, I'd been vomiting the whole day. I was really tired and exhausted because I was already exhausted the night that my labor started. I just thought, well, I only had, yeah, because I had 1 day left before I had to legally transfer. I had 1 day left before 42 weeks. So this was 41 and 5, the night of 41 and 5, that she basically said, because, we even forgot, if I hadn't gone into labor the day that I went to Torrey Pines, she was going to give me castor oil to
That's right.
induce labor. So I really didn't want to take castor oil. And it's so funny that I started labor that night, so I didn't have to do castor oil. But
And
I
you
don't
didn't
know
want to do castor oil because you didn't want to have nausea and vomiting and diarrhea.
which I had anyways. So I always get what I don't want. I always manifest it. It's like whatever I focus on, I like brings into my space. So that night it was a hard decision, but at the end of the day, I was kind of leaving it up to everyone in my life and what they felt was right. And they said, I think we need to transfer to the hospital and you need to get an IV. Basically, the biggest
No, not
concern.
IUD, epidural.
No, an IV. I
Oh,
really needed
IV.
an
I think you said
IV.
IUD. I was like, you
Oh
don't
no,
need an
not an
IUD.
IV. No more babies. No, an IV because, and that was the biggest reason why I went was because I was like, okay, well, I know as being a doctor how depleted I am after vomiting that much and having diarrhea and not have eaten for over a day and not have slept. And I really just wanted an IV and I wanted to rest. So
Mhm.
I was not stoked about getting an epidural. I wasn't stoked about anything, but I had friends who went to the hospital, got an epidural, slept through the night, and then like had a vaginal birth the next day, pushed out their baby. Like I imagined that in my head.
Yes, and you were progressing so well that I really think everybody thought that that's how it was going to be because it was like, okay, you are in labor, your body is doing it. It's just that you really need to rest and get repleted and rehydrated. And
Mm-hmm.
so if you can go do that, then it's going to be different from what you thought, but we'll get there. Like everybody had full confidence. Even the
Yeah.
midwife was like, it'll be fine. We just need to get there.
Yeah. And I remember my midwife when she checked my cervix saying, a lot of times I can energetically feel when a person is resisting labor. And she's like, I don't feel that from you. I don't think that you're blocking this. Like your cervix feels really good. Everything feels open. So I never understood what was going on and we never will know.
Me
But
either.
basically we decided to transfer to the hospital. And then, my grief process really hit me where it's like, oh my gosh, I'm not going to have this home birth, this thing I imagined and dreamed. And I also never even prepared myself for a hospital birth. I didn't read that part of the books. I didn't, read that part of like the birth prep classes because I wasn't even trying to bring it into my space. I didn't even want to go there. So I wasn't prepared on how to have an empowered like birth and at the hospital. So I remember asking you quickly, I'm like, oh my God, where's my birth plan? And thank God I had written one out on a piece of paper. I had it ready. But at that point, my being a doctor is like really funny because I've had a lot of not great experiences with the conventional medical system with patients and otherwise. And I just knew in a way I kind of had to, I was preparing myself to go into a fight of like, okay, who am I going to have to fight? Who am I going to have to, battle and who's with me to protect me? And, oh my gosh, is Mike going to be able to come? What if he tests positive for COVID, like randomly? What if he was exposed like a
Yeah,
day
that was
ago?
another thing that was really stressful is planning his COVID test and my COVID test so that we
Yes.
could come because it had to be within 72 hours, but we didn't want to go and take it and then have it be not ready or have it be too late. And, trying as it was getting closer, we were just sort of, okay, maybe what if we do need to go to the hospital? We should get these tests. But then managing that was its own sort of stressful
Oh
thing
my
that we were
gosh.
trying not to include you in, but behind closed doors, we were
I
talking
know
about
the
it.
the COVID testing thing was so stressful. And, what if I had COVID? It was just like all these things. So I had to like do a crazy, I had almost canceled my baby shower because of this whole COVID thing. It was just a lot of things to think about because the hospitals at that time felt so authoritarian and not kind in my mind based on the news and everything that I heard. So we got to the hospital and that is in itself so adrenaline. And I can see how women who transfer to the hospital on purpose, labor stops or slows down for them when they get there. Because when we talk about birth and how birth and labor are happening in the parasympathetic nervous system, and you have to be in the dark and feeling safe and all of these things for labor to happen. Gosh, walking into a hospital in labor, you never feel more vulnerable than being in labor. And to me, a hospital is so not a place that induces relaxation and calm and feeling unwatched and feeling, in control of your life. It just feels very different than that. And so I remember being there with Mike. We like go to check in and I'm like holding all my stuff. Oh, we got prepped for the hospital and my hair was horrible. You were telling me how it was just like a matted mess. And I was like, I have to go shower. Like, this is insane. I've been vomiting on myself for 2 days. Like, I can't go to the hospital and have another few days of all of these things. And so we prepped everything, threw it all together. It was such like a jumbled stressful situation. We weren't prepped for the hospital at all. And when we got there, I just remember like being in the waiting room being like, oh my God, like what's going to happen? Are they going to take my husband away? It just, it felt so scary because of COVID, even more than other times going to the hospital. And I was like, I'm not going to be able to labor with a mask on. I hated the mask situation. And so we were just kind of not sure what was going to happen. And they took me back into the room, and everyone was honestly really nice. We got really lucky. I know there's other stories of that not being the case, but for the most part, they were really good. And it said we were supposed to wear masks on the wall, but we didn't, and they didn't say anything. So I was like, thank God. And, right away they gave me an IV. And at that point, it was sort of what happened with my IVF journey, where I fought the conventional system for so long, tried to do everything I could to not have to go down there. And once I had to, I got to the point where it's like, okay, well, there's no point in trying to fight this now. It's just going to hurt me. This is going to have to happen. So they said that I really needed an epidural. And, it was like all the things I didn't want. I saw it unrolling before my eyes, all of the interventions, but I was so exhausted at that point, and I had to have some level of trust that they were going to be able to help me. And I imagined in my mind this epidural, I was going to wake up and my baby, I was going to be ready to push my baby. So they started my epidural. And
what was that process like for you? Do you remember getting it?
I do. I mean, I don't have needle phobia. I've been poked and prodded so many times throughout our journey, and just in medical school too. Like people practiced on me.
Oh my gosh. Yeah. The stab lab was the worst for me.
So for me, it's really hard almost being a doctor and knowing all the things, Yeah. I know the unfortunate consequences. I have patients who've had the rare situation where they had an epidural and now they have, chronic leg pain, or they have issues, from these things. So those things were running through my mind, all of the what ifs, all of the rare situations, all the potential possibilities. I know them. I've learned them.
Yeah.
I help. And then also on the other side, saying it's okay, like everything's going to be okay, and just like
it's almost like the little angel and the devil on your shoulder, like yes. The medical zebra fear-based person, and then sort of the like, no, don't bring it into your space.
Yes, totally. That was my entire fertility journey and my entire birth. It was those two little things talking to each other. And I remember consciously having those thoughts of like the anxiety coming in and then like the calm coming back, because it's like I think with people with anxiety, they let the fear and anxiety one just get louder, and it will take you into a paralyzing state 100%. I, wasn't letting that happen. And so I kept just bringing in my positive affirmations. And I remember like the anesthesiologist was very nice, and, you bend over and they do the whole thing. And I was just praying, it's like, please let it go good and don't hurt my nerves. I wasn't afraid of the actual moment. Like I don't care getting poked. It was just like, don't let me have long-term consequences,
Right.
And at that point you just don't know if you do or not. So that whole thing happened. And honestly, it wasn't terrible that I didn't have pain anymore. It sucked that I wasn't able to feel my labor and be with my baby and be in my legs and all of that. And I think if I had just started labor and just like walked in to get an epidural, that would be very different. But I was just so tired and so exhausted, and I wasn't able to lay down without vomiting before. Oh, but one thing, before I got my epidural in the hospital, I had another vomiting episode. I remember going into the bathroom.
Yes.
And I was having a really big contraction. Mike was there, and I was like, oh my God. And like, I was having a contraction like in the bathroom, and then I like turned and I vomited in the toilet, or in the trash can. It was so bad. And when I did that, I threw my back out.
Oh, that's right. Oh my gosh.
And then, oh my God, but like in such a weird, I mean, I know chiropractic, I know all the things. I don't know what happened with this vomiting, that it induced such intense back pain that I remember when I got the epidural, I was laying there, it wherever the spinal block was, it wasn't at that level, because my back, then I was laying there in pain, like excruciating pain that to me was almost worse than the contractions. And I didn't know what to do about it because the epidural wasn't taking care of it. And so I was just laying there with this horrible back pain from this vomit. And I was like, you've got to be kidding me. It was just like, one thing after another. And it was just like, how unfortunate is that? So that sucked. And then I did get some sleep that night. I remember.
Really quick question. Before you threw your back out, what did you think of the pain of the contractions? Like, was it manageable still, or was it like each one were you really like, wow, this is so intense? Or I just don't remember where you were at that point with
You
it.
know, I'm like, this is so weird. I try to think back on my labor and I don't even remember them.
I know the
I
hormones are strong. This is why we keep having babies because we don't
I know.
remember birth.
I'm like, I'm trying to connect to that pain, and it's like the drugs of labor are so different. Like I remember the pain of my IVF retrieval that I chose to do without anesthesia because I obviously wasn't on oxytocin at that time. But
Yeah.
I'm pretty sure in the moment I do remember thinking, oh my God, these are a lot more painful than I thought. And oh my gosh, like, you know, I was obviously painful enough to induce me to vomit, unless it was just my body's reaction to it. But it wasn't like I was like, oh, these are nice. Like I'm just feeling pressure and vomiting. Like it was definitely
Yeah,
pain
it was
and then
intense for
vomit.
sure. Okay. I was just curious if you, because I never really got to debrief with you like
But
what
it's
you thought.
honestly really hard for me thinking back. It's like it erased it from my memory. I can't even remember what that feeling.
Birth
Like
amnesia, man.
if I were to be like describe a contraction, I honestly don't think I could. I don't know. It's so weird. So, anyways, I had the epidural. You know, the worst part about the hospital is that they just wake you up all the time and they come in all the time and their little machines beep and they have things all over your fingers. And I hated it. You know, I'm just like, oh, this sucks. And so they came in, checked me. I know I never made it past 5 centimeters. So at
Right.
that point, I think I was only still 3 or 4.
No,
They
I think you were 5 when you got the epidural, and then that was what was curious about it, was that all the other interventions happened and you stayed at 5. Or maybe you
Yeah,
went from 4 to
I
5
think I
and then
went from
you
4 to 5.
yeah, you never got past. Okay, so keep going, but
Yeah. So
I do remember that being very odd, and then that was concerning to me and
yeah,
everybody really.
right. Because
Yeah.
I was like, okay, let's say I was 4 centimeters. They started me on Pitocin. And I was like, here we go. Here we go. This is the intervention of birth. It's like happening before my very eyes. I can't do anything about it. And they were giving me Pitocin, laying there. Nothing happened. I remember hours go by, you know, so this is in the morning. This is my second morning in labor. I had already labored that whole night, that whole day. This is me in the hospital now. We went around 11 p.m. that next morning. They're like, well, nothing. I remember them giving me the option they gave me the option to break my water to get Pitocin. I remember at the time the doctor knew I wanted to be more natural, so she recommended I break my water first, which in hindsight I wish we'd done it the other way, but it didn't matter at the end. So they broke my water first to try to get labor going. I was in my epidural, they broke my water. Nothing happened. Hours went by, no change at all. So then they're like, okay, well, that didn't work, so we're going to try Pitocin. I was like, okay, well, at this point, what am I going to do? I'm just laying there, you know,
Right.
numb. I remember jiggling my leg back and forth. It's like completely numb and it's just like, this is weird. So they gave me Pitocin, still nothing. And then all day they keep checking me, no change. And so then they did a catheter in my uterus to make sure that the Pitocin they were giving me was strong enough to like induce these contractions. So then they were upping my Pitocin and they kept going up and up and up. And I was getting so much Pitocin at this point. And I had all of these interventions where they were trying to get labor to start. And at the end of that day, basically I was barely budged. I mean, I just hadn't even gone. And so I was almost at 42 weeks. And the kicker was because they broke my water, I was coming up at the legal time of when they would be watching me and wanting to give me antibiotics and all of this stuff because they had broke my water. And it was just getting concerning. I know Mike was I didn't know he was freaking out, but he has like a video that he even took of himself, which is very unlike him, of him crying because he didn't know like what was happening. And we were concerned for the baby. The baby was fine as far as her vitals and everything, but it was just weird. It was mysterious. No one knew what was going on. No one knew
It
what
was
was
starting
happening.
to get like ominous. There was some kind of air that moved in by the end of that night where after they upped your Pitocin, I think you were at like 20 with your Pitocin, which is really high.
Mm-hmm.
And not really, I mean, it's not like, higher than what they would normally do, but it's just like on the higher end. They started at you at like 5 and then they go up and, and they had that pressure monitor and your contractions were strong. So they were like, I don't know, nothing was changing. She wasn't descending further. Your station wasn't changing. Her head, she didn't seem stuck yet. She wasn't even low enough to be stuck. It was like, what is going on? We moved you, we had you up, we left and right and peanut ball and all these different, as much as we could, we were trying to do the things, but then it sort of got to this point where Mike started getting really, and he didn't want you to know about it, but he was giving me these eyes like save me from this situation. He was so deeply uncomfortable and I felt so bad for him. And he's like, I want this baby out. Like, I want everything to be okay. I think he was actually also very concerned about you.
Yeah.
But it also, of course, the baby, although everything was fine. You guys were both totally fine. It was just that, now 2 days of interventions, felt like,
Yeah.
and really like strong interventions too.
Yeah.
And nothing was happening. It was like, okay, this is really odd. Like, we have tried
Like literally everything in
everything.
in the alternative medical world, everything in the conventional world, literally everything was tried.
Everything.
And at this point, they came to me, everyone came to me, and I really felt into my intuition. And I went back to that conversation that I had with my daughter on that walk when I said, I accept however you want to come. And I gave her every possibility and every chance to come in any other way. And yes, we were up against legality and hospital policy and all of this. And at the end of the day, I knew enough going through infertility for so long and having so many friends and patients go through this process. I was not naive to the fact that I knew that the minute the baby came was when it actually got hard and when you were actually tired. And I was already so over it. Not over it. I would have kept going, but I just felt intuitively that if I had tried to push a whole other night of laboring, and let's say magically I went from 5 to 10 centimeters throughout the night, and then I was able to push vaginally, did I even have the effort or the energy? And is that the right thing to do? As a doctor, knowing risk to benefit and like just assessing all of the data, like calculated in my mind, is the best outcome for my family at the end of the day, taking postpartum, all of it into consideration, is the best outcome for me to continue to try to push for vaginal birth? Or is the better outcome going to happen getting her out into the world? And, this is what's so tough about medicine and my experience in just the fertility world, my experience in the sexuality and the libido world, my experience in now the birth space of things are just not black and white, even in the alternative world, where people, and I see it in my patients where they hold so strongly onto this one idea. And I hold that too. Like, I am not a person who just gives up on stuff easily. Like, I try and I push and I have this intensity about why I do the things that I do. And I also know when it's right to surrender to the situation around you. And I had that moment in that exact moment. And I remember that they encouraged me, to obviously have a C-section. And I remember making the conscious choice that, yes, this is the best thing. I felt intuitively, this is the safest thing. That I felt intuitively, if I tried it any other way, that it wouldn't be good. There would be something not good happen. And so I felt peace in my heart to make that decision. And I remember,
I fully agree.
and I remember having this moment of this acceptance, because accepting the fact that we had to do IVF took me years of therapy, like literally years. And I just remember being on that table, accepting the fact that I was going to have a C-section, the thing I wanted least of all, like the worst, outcome in my mind in the birth space. But the level of acceptance that I came to, because I just knew it felt intuitively right, even though it cognitively was not the thing that we wanted.
Yep. That's what's so weird about intuition, is sometimes you just know that it's right, but it's not what you want.
Yes. And it's not what I should want, right? Being like a naturally based doctor. However, I felt very strongly in that moment that that was the right decision. And so they said, okay. And you know what? I didn't have a traumatic C-section. I almost saw like a flash forward flash, like in the movies, of me trying to have a vaginal birth and then ending up in an emergency where then now it's like actually scary and dangerous for my life or my baby's.
Well, and remember how amazing that doctor was?
Yeah,
she came, I don't know if you remember actually, but she came and she sat next to you for 20 minutes. I am not kidding you. It was the most it was the best example of informed consent I've ever seen. She gave you every option. She said, look, we can still do this. I'm supportive if you want to still do this. you should think about this, that, and the other as well. And then we asked her, we kind of hounded her. She didn't want to share initially, but we asked her about her own birth experiences.
Mhm.
And she had a C-section and she didn't want to. She's an OBGYN.
Yep.
She didn't want to have a C-section. She's like, honestly, I was in a really similar situation to you. And I'm so glad. And it is like, I love that you brought that up, because first time labors is what, especially, I mean, any labor, but especially first time labors, having had a very long, exhausting labor myself, like, although, yeah, it did end vaginally, going into motherhood sometimes when you're in that like rock bottom state
Mhm.
is, I mean, like, I think about it sometimes, who
Yeah.
knows how that might have affected my postpartum experience. And
Yeah.
I was it felt so right, I think, to Mike as well and to you. And it was such an empowering thing to watch you make that choice. Like, nobody was pressuring you. It wasn't emergent.
Mhm.
It was really beautiful. And like, obviously there's a time and a place when there is emergent situations or when there is really like no choice. And you did have a choice, but it felt like this is just not happening. And
Yeah.
we don't know why. And it's so
Mhm.
frustrating. It's almost exactly parallel to your
Oh
infertility
my God.
journey.
That's why I remember literally laying on the table in the hospital because I thought I was going to be the natural doctor who had to do IVF, but then had a beautiful home birth and was like,
Right.
look, you can do IVF, but still have natural stuff. Instead, I became the natural doctor who had to do IVF and also had a C-section. and I like remember just like the crushing down of like the identity I had like built up in my mind of who I thought I was going to be. But it was so similar to our infertility, and that I was like, is this a joke? Like, did someone plan this? Like, and this is my life. It was probably me on the other side. And I was like, this, haha, very funny. And I remember though, having that moment of acceptance. And so I look back on that decision of having a C-section. I don't experience my birth as traumatic. And I know so many women who've had C-sections who do, because they felt bullied into it. They felt tricked into it, like all of these things. And it's just like how I always say, it's not the thing. It's not alcohol. It's not any of the things that is inherently bad. It's the energy behind it. It's why you're taking it. It's why you're using it. It's why you're doing anything. And so even in becoming a mother, is IVF good or bad? It's like, it all depends on what the intention is around it. And like, to me, I'm so grateful for it because I wouldn't have a baby without it. And same with a C-section. Are C-sections good or bad? I mean, we can talk about, the pluses and minuses. I've since heard stories of women who chose the other choice from me, pushed themselves really hard to try to have that vaginal birth. And it did become traumatic. And then they had really poor postpartums and outcomes with their babies that were struggle. And it's not always that way. Sometimes vaginal births end up so beautiful. And most of the time they do. But for me, it was just that it was the right thing to do. So again, I was like, all my like dreams were like just, washing away as they set me up to an IV and gave me antibiotics. And I found out after the fact, fentanyl and all of these things that I was like, oh my God, I just like can't even believe this. But it was like, this is how I'm going to meet my baby. And so I remember them wheeling me into the OR. And the scariest part actually was that they gave me whatever the medication that they gave you to kind of numb you for the C-section. They either gave me too much or it was just affecting me in a different way. And so it was starting to depress my respiratory muscles. And so I was having a hard time breathing, which was really scary. And I remember having the nurse next to me and they were having to tilt me up, like incline me, because they're like, we're trying to get the medicine to like gravity to take it down. I was like, oh, this seems kind of primitive that that's what you're doing. Because I remember being wheeled into the OR, and this was another beautiful part of my journey. I knew my baby could feel all of my feelings. And I was like, I don't want her to feel anxiety in her first, like, moments before she was born. And that this was obviously a very scary and slightly traumatic way to come into the world. And so I just kept, all I could see, I'm on my back in the OR and I could just see people's heads floating around, and we're in a really white, clean space. And so I just kept saying, Avia, these are your birth angels. And we have all of these like angels around us. And I like, it literally makes me cry to this moment. And I remember crying, just telling her over and over, I said, these are all the birth angels and they're all here to help us. And like, they were literally fluttering around, just like I imagined being in heaven, and that we were right on the precipice of life and death. And that all these little angels were flying around helping, like little helpers to help deliver her into the world. And I imagined them with that energy. And I was like, had such gratitude for them with that energy. And I just like, every little thing, I didn't worry about what they were doing, what they were cutting open. At the time they were cutting me open, all the things. I actually see a video of it. Mike wasn't supposed to, but he took a video of my C-section, which was amazing because I finally had a birth video. But I just had this like great gratitude. And I kept telling her, you're going to be great. You're going to be beautiful. Like, this is totally fine. You're just helping us. They're all your little helpers. Yet at the same time, it was like I had multiple parts of myself. So I'm calming her down and also trying to calm myself down, because there was a part of me that was really worried about this anesthesia, where I'm like, what if I don't wake up from this? And what if something bad happens and I don't get to see my baby? And the fact that I was having a hard time breathing was getting really, really scary for me. And so I had all of these emotions, going throughout my body during that time. I was calming my anxiety of being in a hospital alone was hard enough for me. Being under the knife was hard enough for me, having all of these experiences and then now having this issue with the medication. And it was just a whole bunch of stuff. But I remember when they pulled her out and showed her to me, I was so out of it. My arms were numb. They were completely numbed from the medication. So I couldn't even hold her. They tried to put her on my chest and I couldn't do anything. I was just laying there like a blob, which was so sad. But I gave her a kiss, and Mike was able to, he literally threw his shirt off in the OR. He was there with me. He took his shirt off and put her on him chest to chest. And they were able to do some delayed cord clamping. It was slight, but it was some. I asked for that. And this hospital was really great about that. So he did chest to chest with her, and it was just so beautiful. And he had such a special moment with her, because with our IVF, he never thought he would ever have his own biological children. And so it was just a lot of special moments. And
she came out looking exactly like him.
Yeah, exactly. She was big and huge, and I was like, oh my gosh. But
what did you think about like the way she looked? What did you think, like seeing her face for the first time?
Oh my gosh. I wish I wasn't drugged up, because it is so much harder when you're just drugged up, because you're just there. But I remember seeing her and just being so happy, but not in the way that I would be now when I'm like alert and well. But just relieved that she was alive and there with us, and so beautiful.
It was all going to be okay. Yeah.
Yeah. But then I was very worried about myself. Like, once I saw her, I was like, oh, okay, like what is happening to me? And then, they were like sewing me back up or whatever. And I was just laying there being like, I'm going to be fine. Like, this is going to be fine. But I definitely had moments of like really intense panic that were happening. And it could have been all the meds I was on. Like, I'm so sensitive. I mean, I can't even handle like corn starch and, like gluten-free bread. I'm like, this is insane. I'm just like on all these things.
You can't even handle the caffeine in green tea.
Oh no, definitely not. I'm like, I'm just so sensitive. So I remember them wheeling me back and just being sad at the idea of like not being able to have the vaginal birth and hold the baby in the tub and all the things that I wished I could have had. But at the end of the day, after going through that for so long, I was just so grateful she was alive and okay, because we were so worried about, what is going on with her and like, is something wrong? And so I remember them wheeling me back, and they told me, they're like, the medication we gave you is going to make you pretty shaky and like weird. And God, I do remember that, because when I saw her for the first time to breastfeed her, it was amazing and so beautiful. And it felt so innate. And at the same time, I felt so bad. I hadn't eaten in 2 days, 3 days almost. I had been vomiting, all of the things. Then I had all these meds. I mean, I was shaking so hard. I remember I have a video. I was like shaking so hard I couldn't even hold her. I was like, can you help me? Because I couldn't even, hold her. And that part was so sad. But even beyond all of that, I was so happy that she was there, and, she latched and nursed, and it was
my God, the most
great.
beautiful latch I've ever seen. Honestly.
Yay, I know.
That was
the one
me?
thing. Yes. You were so
her
amazed.
latch was just like huge, her big lips, and she was such a pretty baby. It was like, holy crap, thankfully one thing going well.
I know. And my postpartum did go well. And honestly, for the most part, it was a healing experience for me in the hospital, because the nurses, and most of the nurses, there were a few that weren't, but most of them were so amazing and kind, and the doctors were great. And Scripps Encinitas, where I delivered, is actually more integratively minded than others, because they have influence, from Dr. Cap and otherwise. But regardless, being postpartum with a baby in a hospital sucks. Like, I would love to have a home birth just for that part, because again, I'm trying to nurse. I feel like crap. I just had my stomach sliced open. My back is numb. And, I'm trying to feed this new baby and sleep, and they don't let you sleep with the baby on you, even though I still kind of did. And I just didn't sleep. I was like, fine, then I'm just going to hold my baby, because I'm not going to swaddle her and put her over there on that weird cart that you have for her. Like, she's supposed to be with me. They try to separate that kind of stuff. And I'm just like not into that. So I did the best I could in that regard. Being interrupted every few hours, having all the beeping, not being able to sleep was just so shitty. But, I
Yeah.
had pain meds and I needed them. I had a C-section. It's like a huge surgery. And I remember I wanted out of there because we were there for a whole day and a whole night, I think. I can't remember, but I couldn't leave the hospital until I was off the pain meds. So I remember telling the nurse, I was like, I'm fine. You can start to like wean me off. And because I just wanted to go home so bad. And I remember waking up in the middle of the night when my pain meds actually ran out, panicking because it was pain like I have never felt in my life.
Was it in like your incision or your whole
Yes,
body? Like where?
my incision, like where
Incision.
my
Okay.
C-section was. And I, because I wasn't supposed to have weaned off that soon. And so I
Yeah.
was like, and they're like, I'm sorry, you already like stopped. We can't like give you these others. So she gave me some like Tylenol or something. It
Yeah.
was horrible. So then that sucks, and like you're trying to feed this new baby, you're not sleeping. The pain was just intense. But honestly, like I was so happy still. It was so weird because I know some people have the complete opposite experience where they went beautifully. They have this beautiful birth and then they're so sad. This postpartum depression pops in. And I just never really had that. So, of all of the things, getting pregnant, being pregnant, having the baby, and then postpartum, all three were hard except for postpartum. For me, that was my golden thing that I got to have. And I'm so grateful for it. And, that's a whole other story for another day. But at the end of the day, I had
So
my
amazing.
beautiful
And also like
baby.
such a funny thing because you and I have such opposite, like completely yin yang
Mhm.
experiences in so many areas of our life.
I know. It's crazy.
And even down to that one where you had like this all of the struggle in all those other areas and then your postpartum went well. Like
I
you
know.
would think and any other like clinician and looking at patterns and looking at things would say, okay, this person is probably being set up here for not having a great postpartum just
Mhm.
because, but you just were so happy. You
Mhm.
immediately integrated your birth. I felt like immediately you said it was the best day of my life. Like it was the
Mhm.
best. That was the best birth. And I remember just being like, I'm so happy that you think that. But and then with the breastfeeding, it was going so well, and you just seemed like you felt so well, and you guys figured out your rhythm so quickly. Like you're just such an inherent natural mom. Like it felt like none of it was that big of a big transition. You guys were so elated, after 6 years of waiting
I
for this baby. It
know.
was like so beautiful. And that was another thing too at the very end there when you're trying to make the decision to have the C-section. It was sort of like there was this air that hadn't dawned on me, at least personally, and until that moment was like, holy shit, this all babies are worth it. All babies are valuable. All babies are wanted, of course. And there is something to be said that feels a little different when it's a baby that you've been trying to have for 7 years.
Oh my God. I know. And it was
And
like
it was,
everything was
yes.
so, it was like, why are there so many obstacles to have this baby in our lives? What is the deal?
And it was getting like, if something happens to this baby, like, I don't know if you would make it. Like, I
Mhm.
don't know. You know what I mean? Like, it
Yeah.
was not to like bring up the
Yeah.
ominous side of it, but it was just sort of like, I remember that kind of dawning on me and being like, holy moly. And I think Mike was feeling the same way. He was very, very worried. And then just one little thing I want to share too is that they wheel you out and Mike couldn't go first. So he's in the room, he's pacing around, he's got the whole gown on, and I'm trying to keep him calm. I'm giving him hugs. I'm like, it's okay. And then he leaves. So then they take him back. And then I wanted to set the room up for you guys. So I like was doing some different things. But I needed to they kind of told me that I couldn't be. No, actually they didn't tell me this yet. So I'm just there. I just assumed that I was going to be there when you came back. And this woman comes into the hallway and like bless her soul, she was just really calm and I was like on an intense adrenaline high. But she comes into the room and she's like a staff member. She's not a nurse, she's not a doctor. She is wearing like, just normal clothes and she's holding this notebook and she comes and she kind of stands in the doorway for a minute and I'm like, "Hi." I'm just decorating.
Yeah.
she's like
Just here decorating.
she's like, "Are you the second support person for Leah Gordon?" And I was like, "Yeah." And honestly, my mind, she just talked so slow and it was like I wasn't expecting anybody to come in and I thought she was going to tell me that like you died or the baby died.
Oh my
Like I
God.
thought that's what she was coming to tell me. Like
Right.
she had this weird calmness about her or slowness that just my brain couldn't compute and I was like so worried and so hopped up and anyway, so she comes in, she kind of steps in and she was just like, "Oh, that's because she started out like this. I'm so sorry to have to tell you this."
Oh my God. That's
And
so
then there was a long pause. And then I was like, "Oh my God." She goes, "You have to leave."
Oh my
And I was
God.
like, "Okay, but like, do we know how and she goes, oh no, the baby's fine. She was almost 9 pounds. She has tons of hair, da, 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 da. And I was like, wait a minute. Oh my God, can you lead with like, hey, everything is fine. Leah is fine. The baby is fine. But you can't be here when she comes back. Like, no, it wasn't like that. But anyway, it was just such a funny little micro moment. So I kind of finished decorating, and then I was trying to stall as hard as I could because I just wanted to see.
I wanted to see you so bad.
But I got to see Avi, like Mike wheeled her in first before you came in. And I was like, I just can't tell you. I mean, I know that people listening to this podcast, some of them will have had this experience, but seeing the face of your best friend's baby when they wanted to have a baby for so long. And I had 3, and like, I just wanted you to experience motherhood so badly.
I cried.
and Mike's face too, you know, like I remember that was such a big component of, you know, people had suggested to you guys, we'll get a sperm donor or do different things. And it was like, such an important thing that, like, you know, he gets to have a baby that's his biological baby. And I know people do different routes, but for you guys, it was really important. And that's totally fine. That's totally valid and fine. And this baby just had his face.
I know.
I was like, oh my God. And she was so big and she had so much hair. And I just like, it was almost like, I mean, it's not on par with seeing my own baby's faces, but it was just so special and so amazing. And I just love you guys so much. And I felt so honored to be able to be there for like the whole process. And really, truly, as much as I know about birth and I've been to various different births and things, like, you just rocked the whole thing. Like, every adversarial moment and every intervention and everything that came to you, you guys were like, you really did everything. Truly, you did every single thing that you could have done. And it happened exactly how it needed to happen. And I think this is part of the beautiful mystery of birth, is just like that we don't really understand sometimes why things happen the way that they do. And you know, with your IVF stuff as well, the theme here is that, like, is unknown. And you and I are information seekers. We want to know everything. And we don't know why Mike has no sperm. We don't know why Avia wouldn't come out. We don't know. And it's so frustrating, right? Because it's like, I mean, we kind of maybe do have some theories now about Mike's sperm, but like, it's just this whole thing that, you know, thank God for modern medicine and using the system when we need it, right? Because you really did need it, I feel like. And it was just so beautiful to watch you go through the thing and then become, you know, just fall into motherhood like so easily and so effortlessly. And still now, you know, and I can't wait for you to do it again.
Oh my God. Thank you so much. Oh my God, that was so sweet. And it makes me so happy to just hear your experience of my experience. And yeah, I mean, just being able to join you in that, you know, I remember when we started trying, gosh, I like, so many of my friends, you included, had so many children. I was always so happy for you, obviously. And it just feel like, why can't I be in that club, you know? And I remember finally getting to be in the club, and it was the best thing ever. And
I'm so happy you're here in the club because it is the best thing ever. And you still are just like such an inspiration to me in the way that motherhood is like so easy for you, because as much as I do love motherhood, it's not easy for me. And, you know, it's parts of it are getting easier and things, but it's just like, again, with the yin and the yang, it's so funny. It's like, but anyway, so thank you for having me be there, and thank you for sharing all of the details with all of our followers, because I know it's going to be so relatable for so many people and different aspects of that story, and from, you know, the home to the transfer and then all of the different things that happened. And so it's so important that we shared a variety of experiences with people so that they don't feel alone, so that they don't feel like, oh, I'm the only one that this happened to.
Yeah. Oh, I love it. Thank you so much, Morgan. And we'll talk more about our postpartum stories at some point, but I hope that was inspiring to all of you. And thank you for listening to my birth story. Thanks for listening to this episode of the Healthy as a Mother podcast.
In order for other women to hear this information, please leave a review with Apple Podcasts, subscribe, and send to a friend who could benefit from this content.
We're so excited to share more on becoming and being a mother next time. And remember, a healthier future starts now, and it starts with you.
Please remember that the ideas and views presented in this podcast are for informational purposes only and are not intended to serve as a substitute for medical care of any kind, including the diagnosis or treatment of any illness or disease. Consult with your provider before integrating this information into your own care plan. Now go have a wonderful day. You've got this.